Hey guys! Today I want to do a brief showcase of the Spectre for the female Slayer class. I'll be covering things like general playstyle, tips and tricks for some notable skills, talisman recommendations, some example rotations, and some gearing guidelines for endgame optimization. Spectre is an extremely powerful class with a unique mechanic called Sheathing, which I'll get into shortly. She deals physical fixed damage, meaning she scales with strength and independent attack. So you'll want to refine your weapon and not reinforce it. Reinforcements will do absolutely nothing for you. However, you can amplify your weapon for some bonus strength. So let's start with a few of her more basic skills before diving headfirst into her core mechanics. Starting with Rusty Nail. Rusty Nail is a very short cooldown super hold skill that actually latches onto enemies and automatically targets enemies in front of you. It also gives you invulnerability frames for a short while, so this is very, very useful for re-engaging after you maybe dodge and get out of the way. And also, a pretty decent DPS tool. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but it's a level 1 max skill, so there's no SP investment. And also, the TP upgrade doesn't actually increase its damage, but the damage is based on your basic training, so if you get basic training upgrade, you will increase its damage by up to 50%. Pretty good for that. Back to the TP, this is actually kind of nice. So normally, Rusty Nail cannot be used when there are enemies behind you. So for example, if I do a Shaker Blast, that's it. I can't do anything when I get past that enemy. However, if you have Rusty Nail upgrade, now it'll actually target the highest ranked enemy in your range. So you can see I Shaker Blasted and Rusty Nailed backwards even though I'm still facing right. Like that. And this can be useful for cases where you have multiple enemies. Let's say you have a boss enemy right in the middle and they're kind of surrounded by a bunch of just whatever trash mobs or whatever. Without the TP, basically it'll target the closest enemy like that. However, if you have the TP, now it'll target the boss right in the center. Even though I'm way past its range. Kind of handy, not really that useful in endgame content, but it could be useful. Next we have Blackout, very low level, low cooldown skill as well. Very, very high DPS, and this also gives you iframes. This has a little short leap. You can also use this in the air, but if you land this, if this connects, you perform this move right here. Very, very short amount of iframes, but very, very quick animation as well, and you can very easily cancel into this from all kinds of things. And since it is a super hold, of course, just like Rusty Nail, if you're fighting a boss with a neutralization gauge, this will deplete a decent chunk. Next we have Shattered Glass, which is also a low-level skill. And this is pretty decent DPS-wise, and the animation is pretty cool. Very wide slash. This is a cool little like distortion effect too. Very cool. The main thing about this skill is that it can actually cancel into other skills. So for example, I can do things like that, very, very smoothly. I can cancel the post-cast delay of this skill to use something else instead. Very cool. And next we have Deep Dusk, which is kind of the same thing, except the opposite actually. You can cancel other skills into Deep Dusk. So for example, if I use Overface, you can see Deep Dusk's skill hotkey is actually lighting up sooner than the other skills, right? Which means you can do that. Or that. All kinds of things. Next we have Wildflower, which is just the skill right here. It has super armor on cast, has pretty decent range, and pretty good multi-hit. But if you hold it down, whilst it does not increase the damage, it does actually give you invulnerability frames for up to a second. And this is pretty helpful. You can see she's kind of like in a guard state. You don't actually guard anything, you just completely iframe it. Very, very cool. The timing for it is kind of strange, but with some practice you can absolutely dodge quite a few attacks. Next we have Shaker Blast, which is this skill right here, and this will leave you in the air. And there are, of course, a couple of skills you can use from the air, like Blackout, Rusty Nail, and of course, Bullseye. But also, getting to the next skill, Nightfall, if you have the TP for this, this will also let you use Nightfall from the air as well, which is this skill right here. If you use it, for example, after the Shaker Blast, it'll immediately floor you. You could even use it like really high up, and you'll kind of like jump down. Like so. Not a very useful ability, but pretty good for combos. And finally, we can move on to the Sheathing skills, Last Order, and Straight Shot. So how Sheathing works is that when you cast an ability, say Overface, what you can do is you can actually cancel into Last Order or Straight Shot as well as your Second Awakening. And what this does is basically it'll cancel the animation and move the damage into the Sheathing skill. So in other words, you can see my Overface was canceled, but the damage still went through. For example, if I did this, and then this separately, you see the damage was 952 and 611, but let's say I cast them almost simultaneously, so you just see the animation of Last Order. It is still 952, 611, they are still separated, but the damage goes through. Now, this is important for two reasons. Number one, this saves you animation time. Overface has a relatively long animation, so if you do this, much faster. But also, if you have multiple enemies, let's say you're surrounded by enemies, naturally Overface is not able to hit all these enemies, right? I can hit the top two from where I am right now. But Last Order will hit all 6 of them. For example, those skills separately did 6.9 million damage. Overface only did 1.2. But of course, if I do this, I hit all of them with both Overface and Last Order, 9.3 million damage. Doing 3.6 million because I hit 3 times as many enemies, right? Very, very important for that. Straight Shot's the same thing, but with a different range. It's instead of a big rectangular AoE around you, it is now an area in front of you, like this. And you can also hold forward to go gliding past all the enemies, and it hit everything in a very, very large rectangular AoE in front of you. You should also note that you do not have to cancel abilities immediately. For example, I can hit Overface and then Last Order, and the damage will still completely go through. So for example, let's say you're fighting something where you want to super hold them with Overface. What you can do is you can Overface and then Last Order to stun the enemy, so you still get the neutralization gauge depletion and also the full damage from Last Order as well. So you don't always have to do this immediately. Next we have Catharsis, which is this dashing stab. And you can see it's not really doing anything. But if you connect the skill, you get this, which is really cool. It also has a very large suction effect, which is very nice. So if I have a bunch of enemies here, and this, and all those enemies are now right here. Very cool. But keep in mind that, of course, you do have to connect the skill, otherwise it'll just completely whiff. The range is a little bit bigger than you might expect. For example, if I'm standing right here, even though I'm completely off axis, it still connects. Very cool. And then we have Full-Bodied, her level 95 skill, and this, just like Deep Dusk, can also be cancelled from other skills as well. Just like how Deep Dusk's hotkey is lit up sooner than the rest, you can see Full-Bodied also lights up sooner than the other skills too. Like so. In fact, you can even do that. Use those together. Next we have for her First Awakening. Her First Awakening, just like the rest of her skills, can actually be Sheath. And what I mean by that is, if I cast it, I can actually cancel it into Last Order, Straight Shot, or hell, I could even do it right into Second Awakening. And so if I do this, for example, if I do it separately, it looks like this. Right, 3.9-ish. But of course, if I just do this, the damage will be exactly the same. And they're also separate. Pretty cool. Now, you probably won't get many opportunities to use her Second Awakening to cancel her First Awakening, or just use her First Awakening at all in general. But it should be noted that if you're using your Third Awakening, and you actually link your Third Awakening to your Second Awakening, now your Third Awakening can actually be used to sheath the other skills. So for example, I can cancel Overface into my Third Awakening, and you can see the damage went through. Now, this will probably never be a thing you'll ever do, though. This is not very recommended because her Second Awakening is very powerful, and her First Awakening is honestly not that strong. So, in general, you should just link it to her First Awakening. Also, should be noted that her Third Awakening is also a super hold, so you can use this to take a huge chunk out of a boss's neutralization gauge in the middle of your rotation. Very nice. Next, we'll move on to Talismans, starting with Nightfall, just because I do not own this talisman. And you can read it right here. It can be cast while you're attacked or downed, makes you invincible in this case. So if you are knocked down, you can recover using Nightfall, which is kind of cool. But if you're using the talisman for the skill, you're probably casting it off cooldown. There probably aren't going to be that many cases where the skill is off cooldown, and you definitely should not be saving it to recover with it, because then you're just losing DPS. This is kind of a weird talisman, but the effect is kind of cool. The damage is also okay. Not something I would recommend. Shaker Blast, on the other hand, is actually not so bad, and the talisman itself just basically removes the finisher from the ground version if you just cast it from the ground. But if you cast it from the air, you only perform the finisher. And that's kind of cool. The damage is actually not too different. You can see the ground version here. Let me give myself some max crit. 176, but the air version, 1.87. So it is stronger, but not by a whole lot. And of course, there aren't any other skills that leave you in the air, so you would have to do something like a backstab or something like that, and that's not bad. You could probably fit that into a rotation. And next we have Bullseye Talisman, which is not that good at all, actually. It's kind of weird. It resets Rusty Nail cooldown when cast, so you can do this, I guess. It's not that strong. I don't really know what the purpose of this talisman really is. Rusty Nail does like a decent chunk of damage, I guess, but I mean, it's not doing a whole lot. I don't really know why this talisman exists. You should probably never use it. Bullseye does okay damage per cast, but the cooldown is very high. I do not recommend you use this unless it's literally the only thing you have. Kind of a weird talisman. And next we have Overface Talisman, which is actually really good. This increases the damage by a fair bit, but also reduces the cooldown by about 20%, increases the DPS by a very large amount, but also gives you the ability to cancel into Overface from other skills, and then cancel Overface into other skills as well. Like that. Pretty cool. So you can actually turn this into a pretty decent DPS skill and not sheath out of it every single time. Pretty good. And next we have Catharsis Talisman, and this is actually really nice because now Catharsis no longer has the dash attack and will actually just latch onto the strongest enemy in range, and you can see the range is fairly large. You see it's grayed out right now because there are no enemies in front of me, but as soon as there is an enemy in range, that sandbag is off my screen, by the way, and there it is. Very nice. So it's almost impossible to miss a skill. And if a boss is, say, you know, invulnerable or something, this will be grayed out, not even letting you cast a skill entirely, until it is, and then you can unload. very nice way to just check that as well. You can also look at Rusty Nail too, but pretty nice. This also gives you the ability to cast Catharsis from the air, which is nice because now you can do things like Shaker Blast into Catharsis. Pretty good. And next we have Last Order, which actually is very, very nice. The damage increase is pretty solid. It also gets 10% cooldown reduction, and also gives you invulnerability frames for the entire skill. And this is really nice. Incredibly good. And you can also pair it with Wildflower. Chain those two together for quite a few iframes. Very nice. And lastly we have Straight Shot, her strongest talisman by far. This just increases the damage of it right away. But also, if you sheath a skill into it, it gets an additional 5% damage increase. So always, always, always sheath into Straight Shot, please. Do not raw cast this. You want to see this little animation when you cast it. But also, Straight Shot has a very interesting and kind of annoying option as well, and that is that it pushes enemies that are behind you when you're done casting the animation. So what I mean by this is that if you cast Straight Shot right here, you'll see that this enemy that was behind me roughly is pushed forward. And if you cast this ability and hold forward, I just pushed all three of those soldiers over here, all the way over here. And this is pretty nice for solo play. But this can be very, very annoying in party play, especially since there's a visual bug where enemies will seemingly teleport to the front of your character, but are actually back here and they'll teleport backwards, and your party members will be left very, very confused. So keep that in mind. And if you can, I would say probably don't hold forward for any boss or any enemy that you will not be able to one-shot. So for example, if I have 3 enemies lined up like this, if I just Straight Shot and don't move, I just get knocked back, that's fine. But if I hold forward, they all get dragged and teleported to my front. But you can see there was a little bit of delay there, and they kind of teleported there at the end, which is kind of weird. And this can be very, very disruptive for party play because on their side, the enemies automatically get teleported, like so. And you can see that there was an enemy like left over here and then teleported all the way over here. This can be very annoying. So if you can, I highly recommend not holding forward for any enemies that you will not be able to just one-shot right away and just casting the normal version. But also in party play, even if you do not hold forward, sometimes some weird bugs will happen where you'll push enemies like that and then teleport back to where they should be. And it's very confusing, and you can absolutely confuse your party members very easily, very disruptive in general. I would probably not use this too often for enemies that can be pushed around too much. And moving on, we can finally go into example rotations. Starting with a very basic one, I have no gear as you can see, no talismans, etc. I will give myself maximum crit against a sandbag with unlimited HP, 30 seconds on the clock, no extra speed, no consumables. And key things to note about this is, first of all, Overface can be cast twice, has a 22.5 second cooldown. Wildflower has a 13.5 second cooldown, so I can use this at least 3 times. Shattered Glass, Blending Pain, Blackout, Rusty Nail, Deep Dusk can cast multiple times in the rotation as well. But things like Catharsis, Last Order, and Straight Shot I can only cast once. And of course, Full-Bodied and my Awakenings. I will probably be sheathing Overface to the Last Order at the start, and then Bullseye I'll probably cancel into my second Awakening just because it has a pretty long animation and the damage is not that high, but I may as well get it in. Let's do it. That's about it. And of course, full body did a lot of damage. 2 overfaces actually did the stunning amount of damage. Catharsis, Shattered Glass actually ranked very high. Straight Shot, Last Order, Deep Dusk also pretty good. Blackout very good. Blending Pain. And then you can see Rusty Nail didn't do a whole lot, but it's free. And you might have noticed I actually very often paired Blackout with Rusty Nail. Like this. Their cooldowns line up almost perfectly. And so I usually use those together. And next we can move on to a real rotation here with some example gear. I'm using Archon on my Spectre with the Enunciation Mythic. I have the Accelerator, 2-Tone Ring, and Shadow Black Suit for cooldown recovery. And I'm using a Cursed Heart right now, so I'm not actually getting the 15% skill attack on counters. That's fine. And I actually have a lot of speed with this build because of Black Star. I'm going to give myself 60% speed, 30 seconds on the clock, and key things to note for this rotation, as I do have, again, quite a bit of cooldown recovery. I will be able to cast Last Order and Straight Shot twice each, as well as Catharsis. And as you can see, I am much faster with this setup, so I'll be able to land a lot more skills in this rotation. Let's do it. Something like that. And you can see now Straight Shot is at the top of my chart as I am using full runes for the skill. 2 Catharsis, 2 Catharses, actually pretty good damage as well. Last Order falling a little bit behind, but that's totally fine. I was able to squeeze in 3 Overfaces, and that did a pretty decent chunk of damage. Blackout very high. Full Body not bad, Shattered Glass not bad, Deep Dust not bad, Wildflower, Blending Pain, and of course Rusty Nail not doing a whole lot. And that's totally fine. Relatively balanced spread of damage. And you probably saw that it was quite fast. And this class does feel very, very good with a decent amount of attack speed. So if you can find pieces of equipment that give you at least maybe 40% attack speed across the board, very, very nice. And next we can move on to gear guidelines. So the 2 very popular setups, Mana Burn and Archon, both very, very good. However, Spectre does have some inherently very high MP costs. So if you do go Mana Burn with Ender's Gaze, as well as Engineer Belt and Engineer Shoes, that is quite a bit of MP cost increase. And you'll probably want a reversible leather coat to offset your MP costs, as it'll give you another source of MP recovery on attack. Otherwise, if you're going Archon, I should probably mention that things like Storm Devouring Energy is actually very, very good early on, as it gives you 7% skill attack across the board, also gives you lower MP costs, max MP, and also gives you 50% extra MP healing from consumables. Very, very good in the early stages of farming and progression. And later on, you can move on to things like Corrupt Soul for some cooldown reduction, or Searching Hazy Lament for some raw damage. As for weapons, the Culmination Katana is not that great. It's focused on a Rusty Nail. It doesn't really increase the damage or anything like that. It does make it easier to use, but this isn't really that worthwhile in my opinion. You could absolutely use this with a Great Catstone, Rhombus Earrings, and even maybe basic training equipment, but that is very gimmicky, but could be fun. I don't really recommend this. Aspect of Art Katana is definitely the way to go for just some raw damage. I will also mention the command setup. High-tech mobility enhancing boots, as well as Rifle Duty, are very, very powerful on Spectre, as her level 75 skill and her level 80 skill, Catharsis and Straight Shot, are very strong, and they get 25% reduced cooldown with high-tech boots, as well as full-bodied, which is okay. And then Last Order only gets 10% with the shoes, etc. But it is very, very strong, especially with Straight Shot runes. highly recommend it if you can somehow play her with manual inputs just fine. I will say that, however, that you can actually sheath skills pretty easily if you have inputs like this, where you have Overface on down Z, and then you have straight shot on down and Z, like this. So all I'm doing is pressing down Z and then pressing Z again. And how to get that ampersand is if you go to the skill and change the input here. For example, for straight shot, I want it to be down ampersand Z. If you hold down the down arrow key, it'll automatically create that ampersand for you, and then you can just set that to Z. Or spacebar, whatever you want. And same thing for Wildflower, I have it as up Z, and I have last order as up ampersand Z. So now I just press up Z and then press Z again. Naturally, you will have to probably manually input everything else, so you'll have to figure that one out on your own, but it is very, very powerful. And that's about it. To recap, the Spectre is a very powerful but also very versatile class with a unique mechanic that makes playing her feel both dynamic and very fluid. If you haven't already tried her out, I highly recommend you give her a shot. I think you'll like her. If you have any questions regarding this class, please drop a comment below. You can also join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to below as well. And of course, you can catch me live on Twitch if you'd like to ask me anything directly. I stream most days of the week, generally after 5 p.m. Pacific, so I hope to see you there. Otherwise, take it easy out there. Cheers, guys.